Hey guys, if you have watched my previous video on how to choose and buy your first tarot deck, then you should have a brand new shiny deck about now to start using. If that's right, you may have some questions around storage and handling the deck, so stay tuned. I'm going to discuss how tarot card readers treat their cards, how to store them correctly, and more importantly for those with a new tarot deck for the first time, I'm going to provide a few tips on what you can do with your deck to start reading quickly as possible. So if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, please like the video, and feel free to put any questions you have in the comments below. Stay tuned. Whether this is your first ever tarot deck or whether it's your 121st tarot deck in a mad tarot buying spree, there's a few preliminary steps that I recommend that everyone does in order to get used to that deck, learn it, and ultimately get using it as fast as possible. So first things first, take it out of the packaging. Next, you will be left with a 78 card playing deck like this. That's in order. So you've got 22 major arcana cards. These are the highly pictorial trump cards, the allegorical trump cards that I was talking about in a previous video. And you have 56 cards in the minor arcana. This is what most resembles a standard playing card deck for your poker decks and your standard playing cards. They've got 4 suits, and the major difference, other than what the suits are, what the sort of suits are called, are the fact that each suit has 14 cards rather than the 13. So in the standard playing cards, you've got the 1 to 10 pip cards, same in the tarot, and instead of 3 court cards, you've got 4. So instead of Jack, Queen, King, you've got Page, Knight, Queen, and King. Sometimes these change names, so don't get too wedded to the names of the cards. And for now, we'll put the minor arcana aside. It is completely possible to read tarot with just these 22 major arcana cards. I used to read both, and now for certain decks, especially the Marseille style decks, I only read with the 22 cards. Rather than being detrimental and not having enough cards, what it means to me is that it's a lot more razor focused and a lot more detailed than reading with all 78 cards. There's a lot less voices shouting to be heard, and I find that readings with just the 22 cards feels much more like I'm telling the client a story and a story is unfolding than with the full deck. There are some decks that I still use all 78 cards for example, the Rider-Waite I would still use all 78 cards for, and it may be a matter of preference to you as you move forward in your tarot card reading journey. So there may be card decks that you read all 78 and some that you just read the 22. Some card decks only come with 22 majors, especially some of the newer art decks. They design the majors and they don't worry about the minors. So this is becoming quite a trendy new thing as well as a historical thing. Jodorowsky, the tarot expert, is quoted in one of the tarot books as kind of explaining why he moved from one full deck to start using 2 decks shuffled together because he couldn't have enough cards in a tarot card reading, and then he was doing spreads that were so big they had to use the floor. And then one day he realized that he couldn't have too many cards, that he could keep adding cards and adding cards and adding cards and ending up with bigger and bigger spreads. So he pared back and started reading with 22 cards because there was no difference. He didn't see any difference in having 200 cards as he did with 22 cards. So he now reads in a very French school style of tarot with 22. So our videos will be focusing on these meanings first so that we can kind of get everyone reading as fast as possible, and then kind of looking at the minor arcana later. For now though, these are in order. before we start shuffling them into kind of primordial chaos. So spend some time with each of these cards in order. Spend a few minutes looking at each card and noting your first impressions with each card. If you are the studious amongst us, you may start a notebook, a tarot journal, and have one page dedicated to each card. On each of the pages you can then note your initial feelings about each card, whether you like them, whether you dislike them, whether there's things that stand out for you, or whether there are things that you don't like or aren't as important, and how you approach that card first. So does this card make you laugh quite a lot because of these buttocks being exposed here, and this animal, sometimes referred to as a cat, sometimes referred to as a dog, almost kind of scratching or biting at it? Does this appeal? Does this stand out to you? That this stick with the possessions on it is being held by the left hand, but being supported by the right shoulder, contralateral to the body. This is quite an uncomfortable way of holding a staff over your shoulder. So this could mean something special. So if this stands out, I'd jot that down and then maybe reflect on it later as what that could mean for me. But then we could also compare it to any other tarot books or what other people say. Does this card instill you with a sense of distrust, or does it instill a sense of playfulness or happiness, or does it remind you of a time when you saw a street magician? Or those kind of initial impressions cannot be reproduced, and when you read descriptions or books or even watch these videos, they're going to change because of what you've read and what people have said. So before people start telling you what these cards mean, jot down what you feel about each card and what you think about each card first. It'll allow you to kind of reflect on that later on. When you've gone through all 22 cards doing this, the next step is to get out of the box this. This is referred to as the Little White Book, or the LWB to quite a few tarotists. These little books are invaluable, they're brilliant. Sometimes they are physical books like this, but other times quite a lot of the modern newer designers are doing digital books. For example, this is not a tarot card deck, but this Oracle deck, Mildred Payne's Oracle of Black Enchantment by Deviant Moon, this has a digital Little White Book, so you'd need to download the PDF and print it out. I think that's done to kind of mostly save production costs. I suppose it kind of costs quite a bit of money to produce these en masse. So these little books are ordered so that the first few pages are the kind of the history or the introduction to it. Sometimes it talks about, especially if it's an art deck, what the artist was thinking when they designed it, or in other times it's history, la histoire. I apologise for my French pronunciation. So reading through the introduction will kind of help you understand what the publisher or the author or the artist intended for those cards and that restoration or that design. This is quite important for art decks. For example, this is the Scarpini deck, an art-styled deck by an artist, and some of the iconography and some of the things that he's chosen to depict in the deck is very specific to him as an artist and how he felt about the cards. So, for example, here we've got the Ten of Swords, and you can see that these mournful figures, and he talks about, I remember in his Little White Book, about how these are hired mourners at a funeral. So it was part of the tradition in Italy that you could hire mourners who would scream and wail and tear at their clothes and maybe even their face, which would indicate to the people present how beloved the person was that had died. And I think that these are chrysanthemum, which is the flower of the dead. So reading these little books help you understand an insight into who designed these and why they designed them, and some of the iconography and symbols in them. So the introduction will kind of go you through the major themes or the major history of that deck, and then you'll get to a section, here we go, on the meanings of the cards, on the divinatory meanings of the cards, and these will sometimes have the descriptions of each of the individual symbols in those decks. So spend some time going through this deck again, comparing the image to what's described here, each of the cards. Jot down anything that stands out to you in your tarot journal if you are the studious amongst us. If not, just kind of take note and try to kind of reason why that divinatory meaning comes from that image, and that'll kind of try to help train your mind in what they mean. Sometimes it is true that these books do not match their descriptions to the cards that they've designed for. Most notable of this is the Rider-Waite deck. The Rider-Waite deck here doesn't always match their little book. The divinatory meaning doesn't make sense to the image, and the image doesn't make sense to this. I'm not quite sure why that is the case. I think some of it is to do with Arthur Waite resting on traditional meanings rather than the Golden Dawn meanings, and Pamela Coleman Smith working from the Golden Dawn meanings rather than the traditional cartomancy readings. An example of this is the Two of Swords. So here it is on this, and then in the book it is described as conformity and equipoise, which suggests courage, friendship, concord in a state of arms, affection and intimacy. This doesn't ring intimacy. I can kind of get the equipoise with Two Swords, and maybe if I'm being really non-literal, the blindfold here could mean like blind courage. But this is not feeling the same as that description. So some of the exercise might be in finding a leeway between these descriptions and this, and also comparing it to your initial impressions. If, for example, this in your initial impressions meant like the crescent moon meant like beginnings and starts and early days and things, and this is balance or equilibrium, then like finding that in the meaning and trying to kind of find a common ground between the meaning written and those. But most of all, you will get a little white book that actually works with your tarot cards, that have been designed with your tarot cards, and you can actually kind of compare the meanings card by card. So go through it page by page and just highlight the meanings that you like and that you understand, and anything that doesn't quite make sense, kind of make a note of it so that you can kind of go back to it later. So that's the first few preliminary steps of kind of getting used to that tarot deck. The other thing that I'd recommend you do as a new beginner reader that will help and doesn't require you to read any more books or to refer to anything is play a couple of games with these tarot cards. Most of these games will be revolving around storytelling or making kind of games. So it'll feel a bit like you're 5 or 7 years old again and you're kind of playing games with picture books. The first game that I recommend you do is shuffle them and lay them out in a random order and use the images to tell a story as you go. So for example, you could say, lay this and say, 2 children were playing outside in the sun. The next card you could change the story to being, however, they didn't realise how late it had gotten and that the moon rose in the sun's place. Meanwhile, their mum was at home washing clothes, wondering where they were. So telling stories like this will just kind of help you build up a sense of reading the cards, but also not thinking too much as you're playing it. So do that a few times with new cards, and when you're kind of a bit bored and you don't know what to do a kind of a reading out. There is a famous book, Tower of the Crossed Destinies, where the everyone in this tower arrived late one night and they found they couldn't speak. So in order to tell each other their stories and to tell them each other's life history, they used a set of tarot cards where each tarot card meant something in their personal story, and they used the same deck to explain their personal story. So whether the person had a long lost lover who had died, they used the tarot cards to explain that story. So kind of echoing that story here slightly by using the tarot cards to kind of create a story. And you can also use these tarot cards to kind of explain your own story. So if you wanted to explain your own story, look through for cards that represent that story and kind of lay them out and see how you can kind of manipulate them. The other game that I suggest you play is what I kind of call Tarot Tango. So Tarot Tango is laying two cards out and seeing how they interact. So here there's two cards, and we're seeing that the Fool is looking over the tower here, and the tower is being struck by lightning. So is the Fool purposely doing this with their mind? Are they causing it to happen, or is the Fool in the tower when these people fall out? This is very good when it's two people like this, for example, and then you can see what this conversation that is happening is. The Fool might be approaching this person and asking what they're doing and where the local village is. This person might be kind of saying, I'm much too busy to kind of enter into this conversation. So playing around with how these cards interact is another game that you can play, this kind of Tarot Tango. This will really help with Marseille Major Arcana readings in future. So play around with those. The other thing that you might be asking is, how do you store a new deck and how to kind of keep it? You've probably read a lot about things about how people store them in special ways, or how you should kind of keep tarot in silk, all sorts of things. So to store tarot, it's perfectly fine to just keep them in the box that they came with. That is completely fine. This is pretty standard. It's not strange to store them in the box that they came in. It's not sacrilegious. There are the mystical amongst us, or the spiritual amongst us, that believe in certain things about how to store tarot cards. One of those being is that they should be stored in black silk. So I have a number of these tarot wraps that I sometimes lay out to lay cards on that are black silk. The reasoning behind that is it's a natural material, and silk protects from negative energies. There is not much other rational reason for it other than that. So you feel free to wrap them in silk. Another thing that you can do is, if I can find where I put it, there we go. Is to create a tarot wrap. So here I have sewn up a piece of silk that I can slip the tarot cards in and fold it over, and some cotton on the other side in order to kind of protect it and not have the silk tear up, and then I could just wrap them closed like so. So if you're a dab hand with a sewing machine, this should be really pretty easy to knock up. I did one just to store my cards and a black obsidian mirror. I use the mirror sometimes when I'm reading. If I'm doing like a party or something, having a black mirror can sometimes give it that feel of mysticism. So sometimes I just set it up to make it look good, but then other times I kind of actually use the mirror just if I get stuck or I'm not quite sure what to do or where to go with the interpretation. Anyway, so you can kind of create your own wrap for storing cards. The other thing you can do is store them in a wooden box. I have read a recommendation that says storing them in a wooden box in the east of the house. That's a very kind of ritualistic, spiritual, mystical thing, and you kind of store your tarot cards how you think. I used to have a wooden box that I used to store my mythic deck in. Unfortunately, that is long gone from a house burglary. But you can do that, and you can obviously store in with it some candles or some incense or things that mean things. When we give these special rituals around the cards, what we're doing is we're signaling them as special things, that they're not just pieces of card, but kind of a special tool to use in divination. So these kind of things can help build up in our subconscious mind this approach or this state of being with the cards, that we're doing something special and therefore need more focus or attention or meditative trance-like feel whilst we're handling them. So store them how you wish. There's a few suggestions in the box, wrapped up in silk, sometimes black, or stored in a box or a specially designed wrap. Normally it's kind of a natural material. Another thing that you might be asked is whether you cleanse your deck. Some people believe in cleansing the deck of negative energies if you are more spiritual. The suggested ways are sprinkling salt on the deck, which is a corrosive, so it will damage the cards over time, or wafting them through incense. I have even had a tarot teacher who held one of his decks under a sacred spring. That obviously will buckle the cards, so you will not end up with a neat, tight pack like this. They'll all be kind of buckled and wiggly, because cards should not go in water. So if you feel like you need to cleanse it or bless the deck before you start using it, feel free to. Normal ways of doing it without ruining it would be through incense. I sometimes cleanse my cards if I've given quite a heavy reading. So normally that would mean around death or depression, those kind of very heavy emotions that are very difficult for people to handle. Then I sometimes kind of cleanse them, and they're normally through incense smoke, frankincense usually. I don't tend to do it an awful lot. It's pretty rare nowadays, but I occasionally do. The other thing that I sometimes see people say is about cleansing yourself after a reading, which is completely fine if you're someone that does that. I tend to not. I don't see the need for it, but people that do tend to think that it helps break that state between reading and your everyday. So it's quite a useful ritual in order to kind of say, I've now finished reading, I've now finished being in that kind of spiritual trance-like state, and I am now going into the mundane world. So the way that they do that will normally be physically washing their hands, and sometimes physically washing them with salt water if it was particularly needing to cleanse, and sometimes wafting themselves with incense smoke if they feel like it. The other thing that I do see is whether people should handle your tarot cards. I don't mind. Some people are very against other people touching their tarot cards. They believe that they have built their own personal energy around those tarot cards, and other people touching them will introduce their energy into the tarot cards, which isn't desirable. I don't tend to worry about that too much. If someone can touch my tarot deck and them to add their energy in the 2 seconds that they've touched it compared to the 10 years that I've had this deck, then I would be surprised. But if it appeals to you, don't let other people touch your tarot deck and keep it safe. Some people keep tarot decks next to them as they sleep so that they can kind of embody their own personal energy, and that's one thing that you can kind of consider doing, or whether you want to sleep with your new deck under the pillow for a few nights. I have done. I don't tend to find that it changes anything. I've not had a different style of reading from a deck that has had that compared to a deck that hasn't, but you may consider that. So that kind of wraps it up for that. So that is my mini session on what to do with a new deck, how to store them and how to handle them. We've talked about getting them out of the packaging and looking through the major arcanas and making a note of what appeals, what doesn't appeal, what you like and dislike. We've said to look through the little white book and compare the meanings in the little white book to your tarots and make notes about that. And we've also talked about storage of cards, cleansing the cards, cleansing yourself, and whether other people should handle your deck or not. I've given 2 little homework exercises, including telling a story with the tarot cards, laying cards out and interpreting them as a continuous story, as well as tarot tango, where you lay 2 cards out and see the interactions between them and explain what that interaction is. So I hope that helps. Please subscribe to this my channel and like this video, and please put any comments that you have below or any questions, and carry on watching the next video. Thank you very much.